to get Sam on here because, Sam P.K. Collins, who is our district reporter, who just finished chasing down Mayor Muriel Bowser to talk to her about some things, and was out there on Tuesday night, has been out there for weeks talking to the candidates. So I'm going to start with you, Sam. I mean, when you saw the results on Wednesday morning or even Tuesday night as you were putting your stories together, what were you thinking as it relates to voter turnout?
Well, voter turnout was quite low. We were looking at less than a quarter in Ward 7. Across the board, voter turnout was low in all the wards, given the fact that people pay more attention to the top of the ballot races. But the voter turnout, once again, was pretty low, even among people who mailed in ballots and those who did early voting. And every precinct that I went to, we were looking at double digits, triple digits, nowhere above like 200 or 300 at any precinct from what I saw. And candidates were talking. They were out there lounging at one point, just enjoying the breeze, sitting under umbrellas, engaging this voter and that voter. But it wasn't like in years past where people would be out the door for years at a time, for minutes at a time.
Right, right. And, I look at the Ward 8 race, for example, which is, where I live and where the Washington Informer is located. We had 6,000 new residents, new eligible voters added to the rolls. I think it's 6,000, 4 to 6,000. You might know the number. With the extension of the ward west of the Anacostia River. And yet the voter turnout was less than 6,000, less than 5,000.
Exactly.
So, I mean, I don't know what that says. And I'm not sure what I know I'm reading and things into it, but I don't know. What do you think about not only there, but just in general? I know it's a primary, but I don't even see much happening in the general election because some people are just so, I don't know, just they're not happy with the choices in the general election in November. So what are we going to do?
A portion of it is voter apathy. Another
Mm-hmm.
portion is that we currently have closed primaries. So DC's non-party voter population has been growing incrementally over the last few years. I did drop the numbers. I don't have them on me, but what I will say is that with the primaries being closed, a lot of non-party voters were not able to vote, either Democrat or Republican, with the few Republicans that are in DC. But there is a ballot initiative that's currently making its way on the ballot come November that, depending on which way voters go, might not make the case anymore. So we did have voter apathy, but there's also a growing independent voter population in DC, which is why you might have seen low numbers this past Tuesday.
Good point. Something I hadn't thought about, and I'm glad you brought that up. And as time goes on, we will want to talk more about this. Was it Initiative 83?
Initiative 83, yes. So
Yeah.
ranked choice voting and open primaries, a very, very controversial idea, especially among DC's Democrats. The DC Democrat president, Charles Wilson, was at the Board of Elections around this time last year, if I recall correctly, as they were deliberating on whether to make it a ballot initiative. And one key provision or one key stipulation for it to be a ballot initiative is that the ballot initiative in question should not have an appropriation connected to it, meaning that it should not cost money, because it shouldn't be something that the DC Council has to deliberate on and allocate money to. And ironically, or not so ironically, at the beginning of the year, Chairman Mendelson and at-large Councilmember Anita Barnes introduced legislation that would limit people's ability to introduce ballot initiatives. And I questioned Mendelson on this. He was very particular in saying that in no way was that legislation connected to Initiative 83, but at the same time, he did express his disdain for the ballot initiative. So
Interesting. Yeah, I think we really need to dig a little bit deeper into this, because a lot of people, even when you study it and try to figure out, what it what impact it has. It can be a bit confusing. So yeah, I want to talk. I don't want to do that today, but we can talk a little bit more as this initiative makes its way. But I am do want to talk about some of the key races that you followed. I know Ward 7 was a hot one, and I don't think that the um, winner has been declared, or if they were declared, it was what, late yesterday or today. But let's talk about the Ward 7 race.
Yeah, it's becoming more and more official. Last I checked on the DCBOE website, Board of Elections, which was this morning, it still said unofficial, but Wendell Felder is in the lead by 400 votes. Next in line is Ebony Payne from west of the river. Funny it is, they are in the same ANC. It's quite funny, and he's the chair of that ANC, and she's a a commissioner of a single member district. So it was quite ironic once again that they were the top two, and they were pretty competitive throughout the process. And right behind Ebony Payne was Ebony Rose Thompson. Once again, between Ebony Payne and Ebony Rose Thompson, Ebony Rose Thompson was behind Payne by like less than 10 votes
Mm.
last time I counted. So it was a three-way race by Wednesday morning. The other candidates, they didn't quite make it. So looking at the electoral map, Ebony Payne took on about 4 precincts or so in the western side of Ward 7. Wendell Felder had the middle of Ward 7, and Ebony Rose Thompson had a little bit of the middle as well as the eastern portion of Ward 7. So you can see that that 10 vote split or difference between Ebony Payne and Ebony Rose Thompson, just given what they had. But Wendell Felder took on the majority of the precincts.
Yeah, and did he get the endorsement from the current council member?
He did. He did.
Mm-hmm.
On May 17th, if I recall correctly, DC Council Member Vincent C. Gray, a very, very powerful figure, very significant figure. We're talking about current council member, former council chairperson, and a former mayor, the only elected official to hold all three positions in DC history. He endorsed Wendell Felder. And that endorsement opened the floodgates to other endorsements. Opportunity DC, which is a group that works on behalf of business owners and employers in DC. We also have former council member of Ward 7, Yvette Alexander. And then after that, we had Anthony Williams, former Mayor Anthony Williams. But even before him, we had council members Brooke Pinto, Zachary Parker, and later on council member Trayon White. Trayon White, who after he won his reelection efforts, posted a photo with him and Wendell Felder from way back when Wendell Felder supported his election efforts. So you see, Wendell Felder's pretty much he's an establishment candidate. Take that how you will, but that is a fact. Quite a lineup of endorsements.
Well, I mean, speaking of the council member Trayon White, who won his reelection bid third time, I think now, right, serving Ward 8, at least winning in the primary. But what do you think that this election had to say about his continuation on the council and the candidates who opposed him, the two candidates who opposed him?
Well, I'll say this, and I think the council member would agree because he said it himself on Tuesday night. The two challengers, Salima Dofo and Rockman Branch, they gave him a lot of go. They, from the very start, starting with Adolfo, he jumped out the gate long before the council member had announced his intentions to run for re-election. We're talking about late 22. The ink from Mayor Bowser's general election win hadn't even dried yet before he announced. And then Rockman Branch jumped in, and then they hit the ground running pretty much. So in the end, it didn't take long with the counts. Around 8:15, 9 o'clock, we knew that Trayon White had it. He had 55% of the vote. Rockman Branch had, from what I recall, about 15 himself, and Salim had 20 or 25 or so. But overall, the council member had the majority. He had almost all of the precincts, and Rockman Branch had one precinct, which was to the west. Now, looking at the map, I'm not quite sure if that precinct is the one in Navy Yard. I'm going to have to get back to y'all on that. But Rockmont Branch did command one precinct.
Okay. And I mean, what would you say was probably the most unexpected outcome of this election?
The most unexpected outcome of the election was the win being as decisive as it was. I think
Mhm.
that given what residents have been saying for the last couple of years about their dissatisfaction with the council members' legislation or lack of legislation, the margin some would have expected to be a bit closer. But as I have been gathering from voters on the streets, the reason why that we saw this result could in fact stem from the split between opposition. With two opponents in the mix, oppositions often split. And given Salima Dofo's troubles with the with Auditor Kathleen Patterson, that in turn might have turned some people off to him as well, which is why the council member, the incumbent, was able to come in strong.
Well, on the citywide landscape as well, there was a name that I know he did some a bit of advertising, but a name that came out that was victorious over a common a household name, and that the candidate was, what is it, Ankit,
Yes.
who won. Talk about that race.
So Ankit, he has experience with Sierra Club DC,
Okay.
and he beat Eugene Kinlow. Eugene
Yeah.
Kinlow, an establishment candidate, worked in the Bowser administration, a key figure as far as lobbying on behalf of DC, especially during COVID time when DC, the amount of money that it was getting for federal COVID funds, even though DC has a larger population than the territories, it was still getting the same level of funding as the territories, even though it's not, because of his status as not being a state. And Eugene Kinlow's job was to pretty much advocate on behalf of the district, on behalf of Bowser, to secure funds and to pretty much secure a lot of resources, in talking with Congress. And that was his talking point during the election. As somebody who has a storied history, the Kinlow family goes back, very, very far in DC history. And it just seemed that this was a David versus Goliath story. Even if you go on Twitter, you have supporters like the former council member Alyssa Silverman, who said that at one point she questioned whether Ankit was able to go against Mr. Kinlow, but he got it out. And if you see the electoral map once again with the precincts, the western part of the city, Ankit controlled, not the eastern, the western part actually, he controlled, while Mr. Kinlow controlled the eastern part. So, once again, you can say there was a racial divide, a legacy Washingtonian versus transplant divide. But Ankit was very particular in his statement after he won about saying that he was ready to change the paradigm in DC as far as what he called a culture where only a few people benefited. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but I will say that there's something to look forward to with him being in his position. So we'll definitely see.
Yeah, well, your colleague here at the Washington Informer, James Wright, just wrote that the Ankit's win over Eugene Kinlow was a shocker. And for many, because like you said, he came from almost nowhere and was successful. So we'll be keeping our eyes on him a little bit more. Before we run out of time, though, I want to ask you, because you're on it, you're out there every day, getting these stories done. What are some of the things you're going to be keeping your eye on now as we move towards the November elections? What political developments or events that you think you'll be covering?
For one, Initiative 83. I'm also going to be covering the local Democratic Party establishment's efforts to increase voter turnout. And I'm also going to be looking forward, as far as Ward 7 is concerned, about what to expect from upcoming council member Wendell Felder. So there's a lot to look forward as far as politics are concerned. But we are also in the middle of a budget season. The next vote, or the second vote's coming up on Tuesday the 11th. And then we also have the Budget Support Act, a lot to discuss around that. So we're still in the thick of that.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Sam, because so many are impacted by this budget and, are really keeping their eyes on it. So the fact that you're going to be doing the same thing and writing about that so that folks will know. I mean, no question, we have a deficit. We're the city's experiencing a major deficit because of the loss of funds, trying to get folks into the downtown area, trying to figure out ways to generate revenue, but people are going to be impacted by this. So we really do need to get this information out to them, and I'm glad that you're doing that. And also, we do have a convention coming up in Chicago, Democratic convention. I'm wondering what the DC State Democratic Party, what the issues are that they're going to put on the floor. Of course, statehood will probably continue to be that, but what are the issues that they're going to be taking to Chicago as well? So go ahead.
Yeah, statehood is a very big one, and just given what has happened in Congress over the last 2 years, the most recent of which was the vote to knock down non-citizens voting, and then you had another law that concerned DC's ability to determine its public safety ecosystem, and even going back further than that, you had the revised Criminal Code Act that overcame a mayoral veto, only to get struck down by Congress, and also that veto being signed into law by our very own president, the U.S. president, President Joe Biden. So, come convention time, there's a lot to discuss in terms of that. How is it that out of towners who know nothing about D.C. are able to come in and dictate what happens? And it just so happens that around the time of the convention, we have 2 recall campaigns that are already in full swing, that will continue to be in full swing. And these recall campaigns are being orchestrated by those who live in DC but are not of DC, particularly the recall campaign for DC Council Member Charles Allen.
Interesting. Sam, thank you. Thank you for keeping your nose to the ground. Folks depend on the Collins Report, which we're talking about creating your own newsletter to get that information out to the readers. So make sure you get some rest over the weekend, because you just outlined a major agenda. So we want to make sure that you're ready to go. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
All right. Likewise. Take care.